try to get the show on the road a little bit. People will
Yeah.
probably still keep coming, but I'll do my little, my little intro. Um, so thank you everyone for joining us today. It's really nice to see so many friendly, familiar faces, and know that you're all here with us. So you probably already know that I'm Sarah Chapman and I'm the executive director of the nonprofit Media Burn Archive, which is based in Chicago. And Media Burn collects, preserves, and distributes documentary and experimental media produced by artists, activists, and community groups. And I got my Zoom cat here with me. And our mission is to create positive social change by amplifying underheard voices, both in contemporary dialogue and the historical record. So before I get any further, I hope you all notice that captions are available. You can turn them on by going to the little more button at the bottom of your screen and clicking captions. So there's that. Um, let's see. So the event is being recorded, as hopefully you heard. And so we will share that out hopefully tomorrow if you have to leave earlier, if you want to share it with a friend. And so this event is part of an ongoing free series called Virtual Talks with Video Activists. We've been doing them for a little more than 3 years now. And the events create conversations surrounding media production. And so if you enjoy this event, our next one in 2 weeks is with the renowned experimental filmmaker Bill Morrison, who'll be screening his short film Incident, which uses surveillance footage to examine the police killing of Harith Augustus in Chicago in 2018. And
Wow.
yeah, it's going to be really great. He's going to be joined by the human rights activist, journalist, and founder of the Invisible Institute, Jamie Calvin, who was instrumental in some of the long-form journalism reporting about Laquan McDonald's and other police-involved killings in Chicago. So that's going to be really exciting. 2 weeks, November 9th. But today we also have a great event. We're going to screen several works by Nick DeMartino, starting in his early days in the guerrilla television movement and moving onward from there. And thinking about his work creating space for community voices in television. So as always, I think most of you know, we want you to take part in the discussion, but first we're going to do the screening. And so at that point, we're hopefully that you can stay muted so that we can all hear the videos. And after the video screen, Nick's going to introduce each clip, but I think there's 4 clips. And then he will be in conversation with media scholar / filmmaker Carmine Grimaldi, who we're really excited to have with us here today as well. Yeah, so as you know, once it's time for discussion, you can put your questions in the chat or you can ask them out loud. We'd love for it to be conversational. It's a close group of friends here. So we're looking forward to a great discussion and evening with you. And so with that, I think I can just hand it over to Nick and Carmine to introduce the first video that we're going to see.
Okay. Shall I just launch into it, or do you have something you want to say first, Carmine?
No, I think I'm just happy to be here. It's great.
Thanks. Well, this is the easiest way to introduce the first chapter of my video career, which was a group called the Community Video Center in Washington, D.C., one of the earliest of the so-called community-based video centers. I joined the group in 1971. I think it had probably been around for a year before. Eddie may be able to correct me, but it was a part of the Federal City College, which was a land-grant institution. And as a result, the Department of Agriculture gave them a lot of grant money, and they had a large amount of equipment, probably one of the best equipped video centers in the country. There were a variety of stories about why the video center folded at the college, some involving politics, some involving money, but in any event, we were able, a group of us, to pull it together to build a nonprofit and get a grant from the Washington-based foundation, and we opened the Washington Community Video Center, slight name change, as a storefront video production and distribution operation in the heart of Adams Morgan, a multiracial neighborhood in Northwest Washington. And we published a newsletter. This was it, the Community Video Report. And you can see the headline is neighborhood. Is it backwards up for you? I don't know. It's backwards for me. Neighborhood television.
It's fine.
Theme we'll come back to. So I'm not sure these are the best of the clips, but this is a tape we made to introduce ourselves to the community.
The Washington Community Video Center presents itself. Hi, I'm Grady Watts, one of the 3 staff people at the Washington Community Video Center. Ray Popkin is on the other side of the camera.
And I'm Nick DeMartino.
We're a community-based communication center in the Adams Morgan neighborhood in central northwest Washington, D.C. We do a lot of different things, and Nick would like to comment on just what those are.
Well, we show tapes here at the Community Video Center, and we train people how to make tapes. We produce videotapes with community organizations and a variety of other groups in the Washington area. We'd also like to show you some of these projects on the tape that you're watching now, as well as tell you some of the theory behind what we're all about.
We're going to edit a number of the tapes we've made. You can see them back here. And we're sitting in our editing room, and this is the equipment that goes into making up an edited television program.
So, without further ado, we'll show you some of our products and our process. Television is the most constant visitor in the American home, and yet the only participation most of us have with TV is the chance to change channels, or to turn it off. Our choices are few. Light entertainment aimed at the mass audience. Seldom does TV fulfill its true potential as a medium for education or community expression. How often does the average person receive information that relates directly to our families, friends, or neighborhood? How often do we get to participate in making a TV program? How often does TV help us develop our communities or educate our children?
Who is it? Who is it? Mom. It is. Mommy. Mommy, Auntie.
Adams Morgan is a diverse community encompassing black, white, old, young, and Latinos from a variety of nations. It is a community which is growing and searching for its identity, and television can help this process. This is a play performed by a local Spanish youth group during the annual Spanish Heritage Celebration, and a 2-day event in our neighborhood. Regular TV didn't find this newsworthy since they cover the entire metropolitan area, but we not only taped the event, but trained several young people in the process. The tape we made depicts the rich Latin heritage in our community. Hopefully events like this will be shown on community-owned cable TV station in the future, which we'll talk about a little later. Working with the leadership of the Latin community, we learned of other communication needs of Spanish-speaking residents. With Ayuda, a Spanish-speaking legal services project, we produced an orientation tape for persons seeking housing in Washington, D.C.
Esta cinta con la esperanza de que ella vea a usted, el inquilino, unos datos necesarios sobre sus derechos y obligaciones al alquilar un apartamento. El arrendamiento de un apartamento puede ser una experiencia espantosa.
The purpose of the tape is to answer the typical question so frequently asked of the small, overworked Ayuda staff. It includes information on tenants' rights, where to find housing, what a lease is, and provides many hard questions to ask of the so frequently evasive rental agent. Other community leaders have discovered ways to use TV in their work. Walter Pierce, a local recreation program director, asked us to tape his football team in action.
Being chased? Task is incomplete?
Seeing yourself on TV has a way of building self-confidence and creating a positive self-image. Another of our projects involving youth is bringing classes to the center to learn communication skills. Here, a group of junior high students discusses how to make a tape on grocery prices at local supermarkets. Some are practicing camera work during the discussion.
If we're going to do a tape, we should do what Bowman says, plan it and write a script, and we should have something that will be entertaining and at the same time put a message, give a message to somebody, you know, teach somebody something.
Some residents of our community live in squalid conditions like these that represent serious health, fire, and safety hazards to themselves and others living nearby. Often the responsibility for these conditions is at City Hall. With community leaders like Ed Jackson, we taped such conditions and showed the tapes to city officials who weren't accustomed to leaving their offices to examine closely the areas they were responsible for.
Behind this immediate area is a very wide space, about 100 square feet, which is currently littered with various pieces of debris, old tires, abandoned bricks, cans, and what have you, and is not being utilized by the community. Currently, you can see the children here who are concerned about this and would like to use this as a playground area. We feel that if the place could be cleaned off by DES and with cooperation of local citizens, this area could be utilized by the children in this community, as you see around now, standing around, who are now trying to do it themselves. But additional help is needed to clear this up and make this a suitable place for children to play in this community.
Okay, well, there's more of that, but I think you get the general idea. We work very closely with groups, including the Adams Morgan organization, which has a kind of neighborhood empowerment mission, and still is around. And, you know, it was a very locally focused effort, presuming to anticipate the coming of cable TV in Washington. Well, as it turned out, Washington, like a lot of big cities, took forever to do it. It was even worse than the others because of their local government situation. And the money for the video center dried up, and that storefront closed in late 75, 76, early 76, I think. I'm not totally sure. A part of what we did when we had these screenings was welcome all of the various other groups that were coming into town, because almost everybody came to Washington to meet with the National Endowment for the Arts, which to get a grant. And it led to the expansion of our newsletter into something national, which we renamed Televisions. And this is you'll recognize the picture from the image on the visual there with my face. This is Philo T. Farnsworth. We did a series about the inventor of television. So we kind of morphed from purely community video into anything that had to do with video and television. And we got very much involved in the organization of groups, including a lobbying group that I chaired called the Coalition for New Public Affairs Programming, which was largely funded by TV, by Michael Schamberg. And the 20 groups that were part of that coalition, we were very influential in getting legislation passed and funding at the Ford Foundation and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And I think had a pretty big impact on what was going on as a movement, which of course led me to want to do more production myself. And the next clip is an example of that. It's called So Far So Good, which is a documentary we produced at the Jimmy Carter inauguration. So that would have been January of '78. And I think the tape speaks for itself. So go for it.
But I really got some nice pictures of the inauguration today. Really nice pictures.
What kind of picture did you get?
Like with my movie camera.
Did you get the
I got the whole inauguration.
Swearing in and stuff?
Got the whole inauguration. Yep. Vice President, Gerald Ford and his wife, and Rockefeller, the whole works.
What do you think is the best image of the inauguration? What says the inauguration to you the most?
I mean, what meant most to me?
Yeah.
When he got out of that car and walked down the street.
That was really what said it.
That was really something, boy.
What did that mean to you?
Well, really, it meant an awful lot to me because that meant he was a man of the people. You know what I mean? A man of the middle class people, not just a businessman. He's a man of the middle class people. He's a real farmer, a real man.
Did you see that on TV or did you see it from the parade?
Oh no, I got a picture of it. I got it all on film.
Good stuff.
On the streets, in the home, in a crowd or alone, shout wherever you may be. This is it now. I am an American. Okay, do you see how that goes? All right, now every time I give you the clue, you have to join me, all right? Here we go now from the very top. On the streets, in the home, in a crowd or alone, shout wherever you may be. I am an American. Thank you. I am every part of me. Rich or poor, young or old, let the message be told. Shout wherever you may be. I am an American. I am every part of me.
And surely if there's any time when men should join together, it should be in this matter of earnest prayer. And I would ask you tonight, if you would, to stand. I'm going to lead you in prayer, if you would, as you join me. Shall we bow our heads? God our Father, our hearts have been lifted in hope today as we have seen your goodness to this troubled land. And it is with earnestness that we pray that thou wouldst anoint thy servant Jimmy Carter to be a great president indeed in this land. We pray that thou wouldst give to him that courage and that grace that will make him as the kings of old that thou didst anoint, to be a man after God's own heart. Amen. You may be seated.
So that was a production of Videopolis, the Chicago-based group headed by Anda Korst. And I spent the coldest winter of my life in editing rooms on the near north side with Anda editing that thing and getting it to WTTW that did the final edit and it was broadcast on PBS about a month after we shot it. And that's a good example of that sort of TV style where there were people, some of them may be on this call, I'm not even sure, who show up and shoot and lend a hand as a kind of collective effort. Other examples of the work that I did in that genre we're not going to show today, but I'll mention them because my co-producers are here. Megan Williams and Wendy Apple and I co-produced a sitcom about Gary Marshall the next year, and I worked with Eleanor Miller and others on a film called The New Klan, which was broadcast on PBS. So that whole idea of, sort of networked collaboration is something that I think the video movement was really strong at and distinguished it from film. The next two clips we're going to show, I guess, back to back, are excerpts from a really groundbreaking production that happened through a complicated series of interactions that really made history. This was the Public Interest Video Network live coverage of the nuclear power demonstration in Washington, D.C., May 6, 1979. And then 6 weeks later, live coverage of the pro and anti-abortion rallies in Cincinnati, Ohio. And these were made possible by a provision of the 1978 Telecommunications Act that required the PBS to lease at the same price excess satellite time to any entity not over and above the stations who had a public interest use, which we qualified for, and they rented the satellite time, and we distributed it on the satellite, and then we called stations individually and built a network from scratch in 10 days. So we had New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Boston, many other 22 stations altogether. And it was, you know, by hook or by crook. Eddie is nodding his head because he was there with the camera, and so were many others. We barely got the thing on the air, but it was a success, and led to the next one in Cincinnati. So go ahead and roll the tape.
50 to 80,000 Americans will march from the White House to the steps of the Capitol to express their concern, their confusion, their fears about the use of nuclear power in the United States. We'll be there to report on that event and to try to put it into a national perspective. I'm David Prowett. Join me in Washington for Nuclear Power, the Public Reaction on many of these PBS stations.
Are you two looking for a moratorium on all nuclear, or are you thinking more just in terms of improving the safety?
I don't think there's any real way to make nuclear energy safe. You can't close down all of the plants that exist. I think a moratorium on any new plants and the gradual phasing out of nuclear energy and the phasing in of alternative energies represented by solar energy.
What is important is to hear from you, for you to go back. There are over 100,000 people here. This is not a soft audience. This is a tough audience of determined citizen activists.
Jackson Browne and Bonnie Raitt first got me involved in this whole thing about 3 or 4 years ago. Just give me the warm power of the sun. Give me the steady flow of the waterfall. Give me the spirit of living things as they return to play.
This program is made possible by a grant from this station and other public television stations.
I want abortion to remain legal. But murder is murder, regardless. And I think it's wrong. They are working to jeopardize our constitutional rights.
The live documentary format for this production mixed studio anchors and guests with audience participation and tape.
Good evening, I'm Marie Torrey. The subject is abortion. If we had to put a subtitle to this broadcast this evening, it would be The Cause That Refuses to Yield. These are the facts. 6 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court made abortions legal, but that was hardly the end of the issue. If anything, it was the beginning of a new conflict involving not only Americans with strong emotional feelings on both sides of the spectrum, but also politicians, clergymen, social workers, and members of the medical profession, among others. What has taken place in Cincinnati this week is a reflection of the abortion controversy. Cincinnati has been the site of the National Right to Life Convention, which ended this afternoon. In other parts of the city, it was Freedom of Choice Week, involving Americans who would give women the right to have an abortion if they want it. During the next 90 minutes, we want to report more than just the events of both conventions. The goal of this special broadcast, produced by WCET and the Public Interest Video Network, is to be a sort of a town hall meeting on the subject of abortion. With me is Daniel Shore, our senior correspondent, who began the job at his home base, which is Washington, D.C., and who concluded it this afternoon at the Right to Life rally at Fountain Square. Dan, were there any surprises for you at the rally this afternoon?
Marie, I don't know what should surprise me. I've never been at a Right to Life rally before, and I found myself being singularly impressed with a sense of zeal and commitment that seemed to run through that crowd. It was one of the larger rallies of the Right to Life movement, but the numbers, as usual, are in dispute, ranging from 4,000 to 8,000, depending on whom you talk to. But perhaps the character of the meeting was more significant than numbers. This was a rally of believers, people utterly convinced that they are right and that those who think differently are very, very wrong. The banners, the slogans, the fetus photos have become rather familiar now, though they were repeated or waved, as the case may be, with a fresh sense of conviction. What was new, though, was the sense of victory. The Right to Lifers have already succeeded in denying abortion to thousands who depend on federal assistance.
Okay. Take it away, Carmine.
Great, that was wonderful, and this is so great to talk about this with you. One of the things that's I found really striking about the arc of these videos is that they really take us through the 70s, through different means of production, different means of distribution really nicely. So we start with half-inch videotape and local video, and then move to broadcast, and then move to satellite. And I'd love to get into, over the course of our conversation, the way that those different sort of modes shifted your style and your approach. But first, I thought it would be great just to hear what brought you to video initially, as opposed to, video just as video, and video as opposed to film, like 8 and 16 millimeter.
Sure. Well, my first job when I left college was coming to Washington as editor of the College Press Service, and we had this conference in February of 1971 in Los Angeles on the topic of mass media. And somehow we managed to get a video group to wire up the hotel. And it was the Media Access Project of the Portola Institute in Palo Alto, and which happened to include Alan Rucker, who later co-founded DVTV. I reached out to him. He doesn't remember doing it, but he did. And we also had a seminar on cable TV. I got very interested in cable, and when I came back to Washington, I looked around to try for my next chapter, and that's what I really started was as an organizer for cable TV access and in the community. And I found the Community Video Center, I think through Eddie Becker, because I wanted to make a tape, and that was the first tape I made. So I was really attracted to video because of the feedback, and it really would not have been the same thing if I wanted to be a filmmaker in the traditional sense.
One of the things that seems really distinct about the first video, right, in the Community Video Center, is the emphasis right on feedback, on one level, feedback of individuals watching themselves, but also communities watching themselves. And then on another level, this sort of form of what I call like a radical collaboration, right? Of having those who are being filmed not just watching themselves, but actively participating in the making of their own images, and being sort of taught how to use this equipment and having their sort of own autonomy and representation. And I'd love to hear first just sort of the political and social motivations that were around this idea of feedback and collaboration. But then secondly, like, I think what's so interesting about a form of radical collaboration is the possibility to be surprised, right? The possibility to have your assumptions upturned, right? Because you're giving the person you're working with on the other side of the camera equal say to some extent, and so I'd be curious if there are moments that you remember or recollect standing out that complicated the way that you had initially seen this project, or upturned it, or gave it a greater nuance.
Well, I think probably the best way to describe our theory was that we were trying to get people in the community involved. we collaborated with these groups, not only to tell their stories and put them on tape, but to get them to evangelize for the video project. And so I don't think it's possible to explain to young people today what the feeling was like when you first encountered seeing yourself in, in a live situation on video. And so we would do these events. You saw the training tape that Eddie was in there, training kids. We would have screenings, and we would have the live video running and have a monitor in the storefront window, and half of the audience would come by passing by. And so we would, and then we would also have live video when we showed the tapes, so we could capture people's response. Since there was no cable, we would cart these giant, AV carts around to show people in like health centers. And one of the most successful examples of that was the tape we made about a local community park that we were trying to get money for. We carted the tape around the halls of Congress and showed it. This was a big success for AMMO, and we got the money and the park was built. It's still there, named after the guy that we showed about the football game. So, I don't think it's directly in conjunction with your question, but just this year, and it's listed, I posted a list of all of the online videos that people might want to check out, including the ones I've mentioned in the chat. And Marina Hikian, the head of AMMO, reached out to me earlier this year. There's been it's a program she co-produced with a local group in Washington about a continuing housing struggle in Adams Morgan that uses the historical footage for the first time in a contemporary setting. So it's called Neighborhood Power. And so it's sort of the same idea, only now it's updated with people on their phones and all that. So,
and were there moments where you felt like your expectations going into this sort of project was complicated based on either the way through teaching or through the sort of process of showing people images that you had made of them, surprises, where maybe your perception of something didn't match up with the people that you were showing it to or filming?
Well, the worst story I remember is when we were making, very early on, when we were making this cable tape, and Grady Watts, he's the other guy on that tape with me, and I went to the office of Nicholas Johnson, who was still a Federal Communications Commission commissioner, and we got there and set up, and it was like the highest level person that we got for this tape, and we got there and nobody had brought a take-up reel. So we had the equipment. I'm sure anybody that's ever done production, it's all reel to reel, so it was all separated. And later on, it got a little easier with cassettes. I think that everything was very loose then. And what you're really talking about is, because the tape was relatively cheap and you could tape over it over and over and over again, which many archivists will complain about because people taped on top of their previous one. So you discover that there's a gem buried underneath something else. You didn't really think about, am I getting the shot or whatever? And of course, that led to some pretty crappy video, as you can see. But it also led to a kind of looseness that this was, 40 years, 50 years later, we have the same phenomenon with cell phones where we shoot everything, whether we think we'll ever use it or not.
I love the Carter scene, right? And I think there is this there's a looseness, but there's a vitality to it. There's like a real sense of presence in the filming and being there. And it also marks a big shift, right? From moving from this hyper local production where the people that you're filming in the audience are all sort of intertwined in a pretty small space, to thinking of broadcast TV and thinking of a different kind of public. And I'm curious how that shaped the approach to making the documentaries or the videos? How a conception of a different public shaped that, of what it meant to be broadcasting as opposed to sort of being in communication with the people that you were recording?
Well, there was a lot of envy among video groups because of TV's success in broadcast. Television's, I think, probably most successful issue, besides maybe the Philo thing, is this VT on TV. This is a timeline of every single group that managed, local video group that managed to get their programming on the air. And in places that had no cable or that had good public broadcasting stations, like Minnesota and Rochester and various other places, they had regular slots where they produced shows and aired them, even though the technical challenges were considerable. I think, Tom, you had one too in Chicago, and these were a kind of a hybrid, but TV managed to get, I would say, regarded on the same level as Penny Baker and Leacock and others who were doing serious documentaries, but they had a different quality. They were looser. The people shooting, as you mentioned, were in the shots a lot and nobody cared. It was a sort of a precursor to Michael Moore, where where the shooter is part of the story. The idea of the person asking the questions, it was relevant to what was being, answered. And I think that's what happened here. TV came to DC in 76, 70, when was it? 5 for Gerald Ford's America, which was a successful broadcast series. And a lot of the people who came to town came up and hung out at the center. And I think that's probably where I got bonded with the TV people the most, Megan and Wendy and Anda and others. And, it kind of led from there. It was like, oh, well, I think I can do that too. And so I want to give credit where credit's due. That's how it happened.
Maybe just to zoom out a little bit before we go to talk a little bit about the satellite projects. I think increasingly looking back, American historians are beginning to think of the 70s as this real fulcrum towards a moment of sort of increasing economic conservatism in the US, right? With inflation, with austerity politics, with radical cuts to funding in the mid to late 70s. And I'm curious how you think of mapping on these different modes of production you did over the course of the decade, and how the sort of shift in funding was related to that, how it shaped that, and how you sort of made it work in the face of that.
Well, the short answer is we didn't. The Video Center was funded initially by the Meyer Foundation on the premise that cable was coming, and then cable didn't. And so we continued to get money from the NEA, but interestingly enough, they sort of pushed us into, what they were really interested in was televisions, because it was servicing the entire movement and not just the local community. And so the last year, and this is something that I discussed in the Artist in Residence program that I did at Portable Channel in Rochester, which is listed in my attachment there. They did interviews with discussions were videotaped with the staff and the board of their group, and their focus was the survival. What's the economic business model, if you will, for a community video center? And many, including the two ours in Washington and Rochester, wound up essentially becoming production companies where you do work for hire for other entities to pay the bills and keep the lights on. And staff members would look at this and say, why am I doing this commercial production work at these slave wages? And then I think the killer became, as this equipment doesn't last forever. You had to upgrade your equipment. You had to replace the editing facilities. Those are capital expenditures that we didn't have the capacity to amortize against revenues because there were hardly any revenues. So I think it was really not sustainable once the subsidies from, foundations are not set up to support you forever. They're set up to support innovation. And they moved on. I mean, they moved on to either facilities, operations like the Bay Area Video Coalition that had a service role and was not anywhere like a production collective or some other role. And I think that's probably why most of them wound up becoming, NAMAC was a creature of the 80s, the National Association of Media Access Centers. And that kind of replaced this sort of collective group in most markets.
And then moving to the two satellite productions that we saw, I would love to know what it was like trying to get that off the ground and have it all happen live, how it even came about in the first place. Would just love to hear more about it.
Well, I did too. Some of you know I'm writing a memoir, and I came to the point where I had to write that chapter, and I literally had to call my collaborators and say, how did this happen? Again, I mean, I remember a lot of things about the days that had happened, the most important of which was we got the whole thing up and running, and literally an hour before broadcast, we realized that we didn't have, the cables were not long enough to connect to the satellite. And Tom Angel, who ran a production facility in Washington, got on a motorcycle and went across town and got a cable from CBS News that he knew some guy. And really 5 minutes before airtime, we plugged the cable in. But we did the whole thing in 10 days. I mean, that's the other insane thing. And the origins of it were, as I mentioned, the law, the 78 Telecommunications Act. But there was a lawyer who was very involved named Rich Wide, and he gave a presentation at a conference in Washington that Kim Spencer, who was the executive producer of the Piven show, who had a small production company in Washington. He talked to him and he said, maybe we can go talk to this guy and see if we can get access to the satellite. What Kim was planning on doing was just like what we had done for the Carter inauguration or Gerald Ford's America or whatever, a TV style thing. He had heard a lot of groups were coming to town, and he volunteered to be the guy where everybody came and met, and they would sort out who was covering what, and then you would do it as an edit after the fact. The idea of doing it live only came about because of the availability of the satellite. And there were some important people inside of PBS, Ralph Sheets, Barry Chase, and others, who said, I'm going to put my job on the line and let these crazy people do this. It was a risk. There's no question. And I think the other person who really we owe a lot of credit to is Chuck Allen, the program manager at KCET in Los Angeles, who I just looked at the full tape again. We actually gave a special thanks credit to. So those stations agreed to do it. And once New York and LA and San Francisco were on board, it became legitimate. And then we pulled it off. And we got great press. I always like to read this one. This is Tom Shales, the Pulitzer Prize winning television critic for the Washington Post, wrote, the next day, May 6th, 1979, was the first day of the 80s. We moved into a new television, though on tiptoe. Not everyone noticed it when it happened or knows about it even yet, but the day was a landmark for public TV, for the technological revolution in broadcasting, and for America's rapidly expanding subculture of grassroots video guerrillas. You can't buy press like that. PBS had never gotten that kind of press from Tom Shales. So that was a big part of it too. I spent most of my time lining up stations and talking to the press. But we had the New York Times and the Boston Globe and the San Francisco Chronicle and the LA Times, and that doesn't hurt.
Oh, that's incredible. I want to make sure other people have time to ask you questions. So maybe we can open it up to everybody who's sort of on the virtual Zoom, and then I can pop back in if we have time at the end.
Okay.
Gary Arlen has been raising his hand for a while, so he might have a question, but he also might have walked away from the computer or something.
No, I'm right. I'm
Okay.
right here. Good to see you, Nick. Can you hear me okay? I remember those days very well. In fact, if you need any extra copies of televisions or the other publications, I probably have them in my archive. I'd be glad to share them with you.
Oh, that's good to know.
The other part is it was good to see Grady Watson, of course, here about my old friend and schoolmate, Michael Schamberg. We used to call him Mickey in college. But more importantly, you talked about cable. Of course, cable was irrelevant in the days when you and I met. And I was actually working for the Man at the time. I worked for the Cable TV Association, as you may recall, before I worked for AFI, American Film Institute. I saw Gene was here a little while ago. And cable didn't exist in most urban markets except New York, a little bit in LA. That was a big issue for you guys, as I remember. You believed in cable. I don't think you personally, but you remind me if it's true that it was a time when the sort of the public access channels on cable were in development. And it was a big issue of how cable franchises would require a public access feature so that people could put homemade videos on the local system. Did you have any memories of that, or you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, in the PDF that I put into the chat, there's a listing of footage that I sort of stumbled into over the course of this memoir project. The Visual Studies Workshop in Rochester is the repository for Portable Channel, and they found these videos of the NCTA convention in 1972, where it's a round table discussion with myself, Maxie Cohen, Johnny Videotape, Alan Fredrickson, and several other people, and the top brass, including Bill Brisson of Teleprompter Cable, the largest cable company, where we were basically yelling at them for not giving us what they said they were supposed to give us. I mean, it's like that was the time when we had done an early collaborative group. It was called the April Video Coalition, and we petitioned them for space. It was at the Conrad Hilton in Chicago, and they gave us the lower elevator well because that's what they gave us. And
I remember that convention.
We had tables with those little skirts around them, so we put shoes under the skirts. And I mean, we had all the groups showing their videotapes, including, I mean, Dina Dudley had like a home birth, like their child being born in the back of a VW van or something. And I was just, these guys in white patent leather shoes would come over and say, "What the hell is this?" And so this is your future, we said, and the whole elevator well smelled like weed. So that was the culture clash that we were dealing with. And over time, we got access to people in the cable industry who recognized that we actually had something to contribute. But it was always hand-to-hand combat. It was difficult to get access, and then it was difficult to get equipment, and difficult to get money, and it was difficult. Oh, yeah, Sarah's posted the giving the birth video. Thank you. Sarah has all the videos. What do you remember, Gary, about that?
Oh, I have so many memories, and I too am trying to working up a memoir of those early days. One of the questions I have in general, and you answered part of it, and I talked to you separately about it one day. What attracted us to something that didn't exist and people didn't believe in? I mean, that Chicago convention, I remember it very well. It was my first cable TV convention, my first convention of any sort, and that it was still the old guys, good old boys in the white shoes, like you say, the white belts and white shoes, mostly from small cities, small towns, because cable really wasn't an urban product yet. And video, you were working on Portapac originally, as you said, because you didn't have a pickup reel. It was a technology that they didn't really get. All they knew was about retransmission of broadcast signals.
Yeah. Well, what attracted me was that it was this is a recurring theme in my entire career. At big points of technological change, there's always crumbs that fall to those that don't have, access. You can look at the history of people's media as knocking off zeros from the price of admission. When we started, you had to have an RCA studio camera and 2-inch tape. That was what broadcasters used. And by the within 5 years, you had high 8, and you could make tapes for almost nothing. And of course now everybody takes it for granted that everybody has access to video. So I think to me it was I came out of community organizing and anti-war demonstrations and politics, and I saw it as a way of combining my interest in media with my interest in organizing. And it gave me something unique to offer to communities.
Well, you certainly contributed a lot in the Washington community in those days. I kept seeing you everywhere, and your work was very well known amongst the people who mattered.
Thank you, Gary. Back at you.
Thanks.
Eddie, I'm surprised you haven't jumped in. Why don't you have?
So I think Washington also was very unique to work in, because it was really a tale of two cities. One was the government and the other was like the community. And the community video center was based in the community, and that really inspired it a great deal. We all watched a lot of TV growing up, and when we started to make it, we didn't want to make the kind of TV we grew up on. How do you feel about working in that community that was different from any other place you worked?
Well, I was struck by, when in just viewing that overview video, how the organizers were all white and the people we were organizing were all Black and Latino. And it reminded me of there was a strong strand of Saul Alinsky here, keeping the Chicago theme going, because this empowerment idea was not abstract, and to us, the idea that you could use video as a means to an end, that people who got hooked because of the video component could use that to petition the government and gain some wedge of power in a place that had, they had really no power. The city council had no vote. They had no control over the budget. The Congress controlled everything. Home rule didn't come in until 1978. And so it was definitely, Adams Morgan was the only place we could have worked as white organizers, because it was mixed. It was a mixed neighborhood. West of the park was super lily white, and east of 14th Street was, at that time, DC's population was 75% Black, and now it's 50. So it's a big change. Anybody else?
What's happened to Grady? I've been trying to get a hold of him. Have you heard from him?
I heard from him yesterday. I thought he was going to be on this call, but I guess something happened. He's not. Yeah, well, I have contact. You reach out to me, I'll give you his contact information.
Thank you.
Is he still around Washington?
Yeah, and Maine. I hope he's not in Maine right now.
Yep.
Those guys are in trouble.
And there was also, who else was involved?
Well, I made a list because I knew this question. The original video center was Roberto Faenza, an Italian filmmaker, Eddie Becker, Philip Browdy, Maurice Jacobson, a guy named Moose, who had been somebody from the Black Panther Party that Roberto thought was going to contribute. That was a trip. And then when we moved over, it was Ray Popkin, Grady Watts, Victoria Costello, Jerry Wurzburg. And then adding to that with televisions was Larry Kirkman, Gail Gibbons, Michael Shane, Becky Moore, Pat Malala. But there were many, many other people who were in and around. Again, collaboration was the byword.
Hey there, I'll just jump in and say hello. I'm Kristen. Nick, it's nice to meet you virtually. You mentioned our work. Nick mentioned I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'm based in Adams Morgan now and working with Eddie, who's there. Hi, Eddie. And Marie Nahikian, who's one of the original founders of the Adams Morgan organization. And we unearthed from the DC Public Library a trove of some of the Washington Community Video Center tapes, which we have used in our first iteration of the documentary that we're working on. That's sort of the link between past and present organizing, and it really is woven through with the power of storytelling and collaborative organizing that you're talking about. And I just was so floored when I started watching through the tapes. I think it's about 3 or 4 hours worth that's part of the public library's collection in the Washingtoniana collection. And it was just incredible to see. And what we've done is been able to actually use some of the original tapes from the 70s, along with present day footage of the same organizers, sort of tying the history into today, as well as the visuals of the neighborhood. So really grateful for your work, and looking forward to learning more and finding out if there are more tapes that haven't been digitized. So thank you.
Well, thank you. There's nothing greater than having somebody use clips from your prior work. There's some wonderful shots going from the same street and the same point of view angle then and now,
Yep.
50 years apart. It really was.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun with those match frames of the present day. So and we couldn't have really told the story the way we did without that your original footage. So
and
really
Marie.
grateful.
Marie
And Marie. Yes.
In person.
Yeah.
Yes, just a final plug there. There are 20 some odd videos from the collection that we got digitized through the DC Public Library, and the link is on the attachment that I included. I think another shout out to Eddie for getting the ball rolling on that, because I didn't really know how it all happened, but suddenly there was somebody saying, I think we'll go ahead and digitize your tapes. And they were done at the Bay Area Video Coalition, and they're on the website now. So, this whole, I think as we wind down, is worth keeping in mind that we have the same kind of collaboration going on right now with the archives. So, you're Sarah and Tom and your team are doing that for all of us across the entire movement. But then there are these, the video database and the Visual Studies Center and the Ron's group in Minnesota, and who I met at the Media Burn event. Mark Stanley's on the call also. These collaborations are really going to be able to continue in the future because we're saving these tapes, and it's important to do it because it's history.
And made such a great contribution, and Kristen did such a terrific job. Thanks very much, Kristen. You don't get enough thanks.
Thank you, Eddie. You don't get enough thanks either. And there's still tapes in Eddie's attic that we're gonna track down and digitize. So
I have to get through my all of my documents.
I know the feeling.
All right. Anyway, yes.
Well, I think we may have. What do you think, Carmine? Do you think we've reached our natural ending point?
We never got you to California.
Oh, well, that was a little later.
Carmen, you're on mute.
Sorry.
Maybe I can.
I kept trying to move to California constantly. And I mean, Megan can tell you, I lived on her couch for months at a time, trying to get out there. And I couldn't quite move my kit out until I got hired by the American Film Institute in 1990. And I wound up doing the same thing there for digital that I did early on for community video. In fact, I wrote an article for videography right after we opened the Apple Computer Lab for filmmakers at AFI, called Back in the Movement Again. So, the past is prologue.
Right.
And thank you, Tom, yes, and Sarah for pulling us all together again.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
So yeah, this was a great event. I love hearing about all of this. I love bringing us all together and seeing all of you. So please join us again in the future. We do this every 2 weeks. So hope to see you all back again soon.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, Sarah.